Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs. I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com, or of course follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. Every week we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by colorist Nick Hasson, whose work includes Somebody Somewhere, Shattered, The L Word, Generation Q, and just to name a few. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, my first question for you, when I went through your bio, you started or you worked at Industrial Light and Magic in VFX. What was your role there? What was ILM like when you were there?
Yeah, so when I started out in the commercial world, and I was lucky enough to kind of cross genres in the commercial world and work in telecine and in online. So when ILM started hiring to work on the George Lucas last series of Star Wars movies, it was a perfect fit because I kind of had this realm of color correction in the digital world, and they were just at that point where they were marrying those together. So I came into editorial as a technical assistant and started working with the editorial, doing anything they needed, keeping track of shots, helping to put elements together and get those to the artists. And then that position grew over a number of years, from that to running reviews with people to working on the Quantel IQ, which at the time was something that hadn't been released. It was kind of the first kind of high res online device. And so it was a pretty cool time at ILM. It was kind of the end of model making and getting into the digital realm. And so it was really cool. I got to work on a lot of great projects that were making models, not only Star Wars Attack of the Clones, but also Pearl Harbor. We were working on AI. We were working on the Tim Burton Planet of the Apes. So it was really cool. I got there just kind of to see this transition from practical into digital, and then kind of how they were doing them both to start, where we would shoot these models, motion control rigs, and then we would take those and add in effects, add in, different layers of not only people moving around on these little miniature sets, but atmosphere and lights and all these things that you couldn't do in miniatures. So it was a great time. It was a really cool time. And that was kind of the infancy of DI. So we were shooting the Sony F900, which was one of kind of the first, digital cameras. And, we did everything digitally, and then at the end went back out to film. So helped those guys with wedge tests and just kind of the overall editorial pipeline, and, from creative and getting elements that the guys needed all the way till the final end, finishing titles, all of that stuff. So it was a really exciting time. It was really, really kind of the infancy of DI, and I was lucky to be there.
Well, it's the Wild West at that time. I remember like codecs were shifting, changing, everything was sort of being figured out to a certain degree. So how did you keep on top of all that?
ILM was great that they would train us a lot. They would give us, a lot of the times at ILM, the technology didn't exist, so they were making it. So that was kind of cool because nobody knew it. So the only way anybody could really grasp it was to be taught it. So we started out, with DDRs, putting image sequences on DDRs. And then that kind of graduated into the IQ, which graduated into using a Pandora, which was kind of the first thing to really color correct, digitally like that. And it was both its own source and its own record. And so it was a lot of learning on the job. We worked completely in IRIX, so there was no GUI on your computer. Everything you were doing was in a shell and scripted. But there was a lot of great guys there that were open and teaching us everything. And I think while I was there, they developed EXR files, which has now become the standard 20 years later. So it was just a lot of trial, error, learning. But back then you had a lot longer production schedule. So, Attack of the Clones was like a 2-year production schedule. So, you had a little bit more time to kind of figure it out and calculate as you went.
Was there any, because as you said, they were creating the stuff that we were using. Was there anything like, because it's a creative process. So it's like, okay, well, we'll build this. Okay, it's not working the way the crew needed. Was there any technology that was created that was really cool, or really neat or useful, or not really useful, but ended up sort of going to the wayside that you got to take part in?
Yeah, so at the time, ILM was on their own compositor because there wasn't a compositing software that was actually out there that could handle everything. I don't think Nuke existed. Flames existed, but they kind of had a different skill set. They were a little more 2D, as well as the Quantel stuff. So ILM had this proprietary software called Comp Time. And you would literally, it was half scripting, half artistry. And you kind of had to learn that. And artists at the time were very big into coding.
Yeah.
So you would kind of learn, like, I need something to make this light blink on and off in a certain way. And they'd be like, well, Jim did that on this movie, so go see Jim. And Jim would have a script that you could use and copy in and use that. And so it was a lot of that, just, filmmaker hive, if you want to say, VFX artist hive, where everyone kind of shared and passed things back and forth. And, it was a figure it out or don't get it done kind of world then. Which was exciting. And we had some guys that were working. After Effects was very, very, very new at that time. So we did have some people that were working on that. And there was a roto software, I think it was called Commotion, that we were using. So the Macs were just kind of doing some things, but for the most part, we were all on IRIX, SGI machines. And, we were talking about renders and render farms where, it may take 30 hours to render one frame. So in order to see a 300 frame shot, you had to have 300 processors to render this in 30 hours. And it was a lot of trial and error. And then we do things like skip frames. So you wouldn't render every frame, you'd render every other and then kind of see how it worked. And even to film outs took a long time. So we had a machine where we basically had a stop motion camera hooked up to a monitor. And one of the things that we do is we would go in and pull up a frame on the monitor and then fire off the stop motion camera. And that was the easiest, quickest way to get a film out so that you could see something real time, the next day. So it was a lot of just, figuring it out, ingenuity, a lot of really smart people. I mean, ILM had everything at that time. They even had a gentleman that made cameras. So there was literally a guy that could take a hunk of steel and turn out a VistaVision camera, a couple of months later. It was a really cool time.
Okay, I have to ask this question because I started not in VFX, but I worked in a post house with VFX there. And one of my frustrations, because I was doing sound, is I would come out and the VFX guys would all be playing video games because they'd be like, we got a render going. What was your longest render that you can remember?
They had renders that were over a week long at that time. Yeah. Yeah, I remember at one point we got a server that I want to say, if I remember right, it had 512 gigs of memory, and it was like millions of dollars, and it was like the pinnacle. Everyone was like, this is going to store the whole facility. And I think it was about a month and a half later, it was full. And management was like, what are we going to do? Because prior to that, all the assets were kind of spread out on a lot of localized computers. And they were kind of moving to that world where everything was getting into one. So it was definitely a think before you act and then wait and see world.
Oh man, it's so funny because like it's almost like the early days of computers where people are like, I need a computer that'll last me 20 to 30 years. And you're like, no, that's not going to
happen. No. Even these days, right? That's hard. You're lucky to get 3 to 5 years out of a computer these days.
What would you say, like, so how did you make the transition to out of there and into Colorist and where you're working now?
Yeah, so I've always been kind of into color correction. Like I said, before I was at ILM, I was at a commercial facility where we were doing film dailies and doing a lot of commercial dailies, commercial finishing as well. And so that was kind of my first forte into it. And I've always been into photography. I was a kid that walked around with a camera in high school and, took photos and, obviously film back then. And so color correction, the dark room, those things were always something that intrigued me. So when I left ILM, I was in San Francisco and I went to a small place where I was doing onlines and doing some effects and title work on mostly commercials and some independent movies. But we had a telecine bay as well. So I would help out from time to time transferring film and doing things like that. And then eventually I moved to LA, and that's where I got a job at Riot in Santa Monica, and started transferring film and doing film dailies at night and doing some final film transfers. And then I went to Company 3, and from there, and then Company 3 was just starting their digital intermediate division there. And so I knew the Quantel IQ and was really well versed in that, but I also knew this color correction world. So it was a great fit to start, where I was, we started out in trailers. That was the kind of the earliest thing that we could get, where you would, scan film, do the digital finish, and then record out back out to film. So trailers were kind of this short form, like tryout for the features. And so I would help the guys. We would conform the trailers. We would do the effects. We would do any paint work. We would do things like that. And then I would switch over into the evening, and I kind of worked this dual shift, where I would come in at 4 o'clock and I would help out those guys and work with those doing onlines and things. And then around 8 o'clock, the colorist would come in and we would start color correcting the trailer, sit with the clients, get that done. And then when that was done, we would record it back to files. And in those days, we didn't have a dedicated dust busting department. So when the render was done, I would go through and paint out all the dirt and anything that we needed. And then we would send it off to film. So that was kind of the infancy of like the crossover there. And then I spent years kind of doing both of those, where I was onlining and doing finishing work for a lot of the biggest colorists in town, and as well as color correcting kind of indie movies and cutting my teeth and learning that. And then eventually it just kind of crossed over to where I kind of got to the point where I was like, I just want to do color correction. So about 7 or 8 years ago, I made that jump where I kind of said, I don't want to do these onlines anymore. And it worked out. Actually, it was a great thing, because I kind of for a little while became a one-man band, where I would get these smaller projects and I would literally do everything. I would conform them, I would color them, I would title them, I would render them. So, Technicolor at the time is where I was at, and they were really good with, kind of giving me those projects where they could go, here, this is a smaller project, you can take it, you can own it, and you can do everything yourself. And so that's kind of how I kind of, crossed paths into being a full-time colorist.
What is it that excites you about a project when you're starting?
It's, the biggest thing is, I would say, seeing everything come together. I'm a big process guy. I love when you look at something and it looks daunting and you have, 2,000 shots and all these elements and things missing and problems to solve. And so the biggest thing for me, the two biggest things for me, is one, getting that together and kind of seeing the final product. And then two, I really like working with filmmakers and helping them get their vision out and kind of translating. Sometimes filmmakers aren't super savvy on color correction. So I really enjoy working with those clients where I can kind of figure out what's going on in their brain and get that on screen for them and help them kind of tell their story and finish this thing that maybe started as, a blank white page. And now we're watching this, beautiful image that's helping support the story.
Now, because you've got so much experience in VFX, but whenever I talk to colorists, they're always like, oh yeah, it's a VFX heavy project, so that makes it really challenging. Do you find VFX projects challenging, or what would you find challenging in your color correction experience?
Yeah, VFX heavy projects are always challenging because you have all these elements coming in. They're kind of evolving as you go. So you're always, things are changing a lot. Things are coming in. You're filling in holes too. It's really hard to grade a scene when you're missing half of it. And so that's kind of an interesting challenge. And then, in the color correction bay, we help visual effects a lot, with kind of consistency and maybe helping some CG elements look a little bit more realistic by, grading them in a different way or applying blurs and just kind of giving that last little bit of touch and consistency across everything. So VFX is always hard, it's that nature of, you have 50 people working on 50 shots. They're never going to be consistent, even no matter how hard they try. And so just pulling those elements together and kind of making it cohesive is what, makes that so challenging. And it's usually not in a one shot deal. It's usually trickle, which is another thing, like referencing what it was, what it is now. Often color drifts in VFX. So, we're solving those problems and getting the color to match. There may be a production plate right here and then a VFX right here. And VFX has done something that's, making the color off. So trying to figure out what we can do to tie those two things together and make them work and make it seem seamless.
Well, you kind of alluded to here, but I've seen like VFX tends to get farmed out to different companies. And so when you have so many different people working on it and not necessarily in the same silo, are there any techniques or tricks that you've figured out to help make them match a bit better?
Yeah, I mean, it's always about density black levels, white levels, exposure. So it's those basic photography principles a lot of times. And then sometimes, you know, helping the comps, you know, there may be a part of the image. And that's something that's tricky with the VFX is, you know, it may not work because of a part of a frame, not the whole frame. And so figuring out what that is and how to tie those things together. And, you know, but I would say it's mostly those tried and true photography principles: exposure, contrast, density, black level, white level, and just tying those things together. I mean, the artists these days can do some really amazing things, and there's a lot of great VFX artists out there, but it's very hard for them to know if they've adjusted a comp. Is their black level sitting at the same black level that somebody at another company that did the shot right next to them, you know, did? So kind of just helping those guys pull those technical details together.
Now, my other question for you is, we're all sort of in this to create stories. So as a colorist, how do you approach story when you're grading?
Story's key. So story is the very first thing. So, you know, I kind of, but usually by the point it gets to me, there's a lot of ingredients that are already on the table, right? And I use this cooking analogy where it's like, you know, I don't necessarily get to pick the ingredients that I get, but, you know, I need to make something with those. You know, I like to be involved first. That's usually the best way, in talking with the filmmakers, looking at references. You know, you may do a comedy very different than you would, you know, a piece about, you know, someone dying with a terminal illness. And, you know, a lot of times though, the filmmakers, the DPs, the directors, they kind of have that vision already by the time they get there. And like I said, it's just me helping them get that on screen. So it usually starts with a lot of references, a lot of different things, you know, seeing visually what mood we're kind of going for, and then taking those and twisting them a little bit into our own kind of special sauce. And then usually when I'm involved ahead of time, it's great, because by the time it comes back, that creative intent is already kind of baked into the image, and we're just dealing with production things and fixing things, and, you know, just putting that last little bit of smooth and touch on it. But we're always thinking about story. Where you're looking, you know, is a big thing. You know, I've had projects where, you know, we want everyone in the faces. It's all about the acting. And so we'll go do subtle shading and things like that to make sure that your eye is always directed to where we want it to be. Sometimes in a story where maybe there's a twist, you know, we want to do that heavily, because we want to make sure that no one picks up on certain things the first time. And so it's always about that story and what works best for the story. You know, you don't want, you know, maybe a very heavy drama to be super colorful and poppy, and unless you're going for some kind of a satire, you know. So we always look at those and kind of you know, base it into the world of the story. And we talk about that a lot too. What is this world like? You know, is it dark? Is it light? You know, is black really black? Is it really deep? Is it lifted? Is it milky? And, you know, so we kind of like set these parameters to what the world is. You know, there's certain shows where, like Onward, for instance, you know, we're in LA and we want this gold. We're always looking at this gold color. And so anytime there's a touch of green's got to go. And so we're always swinging the hues into the world that show lives in, you know. And the same with like a show that I did, Room 104 for HBO, where we're changing it every time. And so every time that story, you know, it's the same room every time, and we're coming up with something that kind of helps the mood and helps the story. Like if it's a sci-fi thing, we may go colder and deeper and darker, but if it's a romantic comedy, it may be brighter and have, you know, more saturation and a little softer blacks. And so all of those little visual cues help people kind of settle into the story.
Now, I have a question for you. I'm in your background. It looks like you have a guitar and a couple basses there.
Yes.
You play bass?
Yeah, I play bass, I play guitar, I play keyboard, I play clarinet. I grew up as a musician playing music. I went to Full Sail to learn how to do recording engineering. And so originally in my early days, I thought I was going to be in the music business. But I always had this love of photography. And when I got out of college, I realized that, you know, the music business was very tough. It was going to be very hard. And I got lucky that when I was in college, I met a gentleman who helped me become a cable puller. I was a cable grip, and then went into lighting. And then because I knew film, I got into to be a loader, and so I
Mm.
kind of slowly found my way organically into filmmaking, which is kind of cool.
So I have one last question for you.
Yeah.
We've been stuck in this pandemic for 2 years now, and depending on where you are in the world, you might be stuck inside due to quarantine or because you have COVID. Is there a show or a movie you've discovered on streaming networks that people should check out?
Yeah, there's a couple I could recommend. Station 11 on HBO Max, really good
Mm.
show. Really like that. And the new season of Atlanta is just fantastic.
I
Really
haven't
good.
started Atlanta yet. Like I'm 2 seasons in. I haven't started the new one.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah,
Such a different way to tell stories. To me, it's one of the freshest storytelling perspectives I've seen in a long time.
yeah,
And amazing visuals and really well done. And you have some amazing actors. So there's just all these ingredients that have kind of come together to be such a special thing.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Thank you so much.
And that's it for us today. Again, I want to thank you, and make sure to check out filmmakeru.com for all our latest courses, or go to Twitter at filmmaker_u. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching. Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.